Okay, so welcome back to返學 DSE. We're in biology chapter 19 and we would like to talk about ecology. So ecology is the interrelationship between organisms and their habitats. And first of all, we'd like to understand the levels of organization, so which is the smallest and which is the largest. So this is arranged for an ascending order. So species is the smallest term, and then we go to the population, communities, ecosystem, biome, and also biosphere. And as for species, the definition we have to remember that it is the organism that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Fertiles mean the offspring can further produce their offspring. And for population is a group of organisms with the same species and living in the same habitat. And for communities are all populations of different species living in the same habitat. So you can see that the numbers are increasing. And for ecosystem is the natural unit of living components and also the non-living components. So it's the first time to incorporate the non-abiotic factors. And then for biome is a complex communities that occupies a large area characterized by dominant type of plants. So the definition is based on the plants, like the savanna. Savanna is where the lions are living in. And for biosphere is the entire space of Earth's surface where organisms exist. And there are some basic features of an ecosystem that is self-supporting, stable, and also dynamic. And to keep an ecosystem, we need the cycling of materials, interaction of biotic and abiotic factors, and also we need a continuous supply of energy. And here are some common abiotic factors: temperature, light, rainfall, humidities, and wind speed and water current, oxygen level, salinity, and nature of substratum. And how these abiotic factors may affect organism. Temperature it affects the function of enzymes and so as the um, metabolic reactions. For light, it affects the rate of photosynthesis and flowering of plants and also the behavior. For human like us, technically we should be working in the nighttime and we sleep at the nighttime. However, for some of you guys, maybe you work in nighttime and sleep in the daytime, and this is not healthy. Why we saying it's not healthy? Because it's against our natural behavior. And for rainfall and humidities, it is affecting the water available to plants and also organisms. For wind speed and water current, it affecting the plant attachment and also the size of the plants. And for oxygen level, it is affected by the water temperature, water current, and also the organic matters level. And for salinity, it will affect the water percentage of water potential and also the water available to the plants. And for nature of substratum, it is actually the particle size. If the particle size is too small, then it may result in a waterlogging condition, and it also affects pH. And there is an important term we have to remember. There is the humus, because humus is actually fertilizing. It's a natural fertilizer, neutralizing, nutrienting our soil. And here are some example of key habitat or ecosystem. That is the woodland. So for woodland, the light and trees decrease from top to the bottom. That's why we feel cool if we sit under the trees. And here is the canvas layer which shelter the rain, and also it has an extensive and deep roots which prevent soil erosion and also reduce runoff. And there is also a thick layer of humus to maintain the fertility. And for coastal ecosystem, there are usually two types. That is the rocky shore and also mangrove. And why they are chosen? Because they are located in the intertidal zone. This is a very important term because it is a continuously changing environment, and we have different zones. And technically, we call it zonation. Why is it very important? Because there are various organisms living in the intertidal zone. Because changes brings opportunities. And however, for organisms living in this region, they will be exposed to strong waves. For rocky shore, you have to develop ways to attach firmly on the rocks, or you have a hard shell for your protection. Otherwise, you may hide, that is, you are able to move and then hide under the rocks. And for mangroves, the trees are specialized with specialized roots because they will be raised above the mud to obtain oxygen from air, and some of them can even excrete excess salt absorbed through their leaves. And if you want to know more, and then search sharks in forests. Other than the salt water, the seawater level, seawater system, we also have the freshwater ecosystem. For the upper course, there is the more closer to the origin. There will be usually a faster water flow, and in the lower course, there usually will have a slower water flow. And the plants are usually found near the stream, and it provides food for organisms, and it prevents floodings and erosion, and they also regulate water temperature. And in order to describe the biotic factors, we will use these two terms. There's the niche and also the habitat. Niche is actually a role defined by food and space. And for species diversity, we have two concepts. That is the richness and also the relative abundance. Richness is there are how many types of species. For relative abundance is whether there is a single dominant species. For dominant species, they usually have a very strong influence on the composition and also the diversity of the communities. Furthermore, we would like to understand the interactions among organisms. So we use the positive side and also the negative side to indicate their relationship. For positive side is benefited, and for the negative side is harmed. And for predation, there are two players. So means the predator, another one is prey. And for predator is usually the larger one that is eating the prey. And here is the characteristic curve describing their relationship. You have to able to notice a few key terms. That is, usually the prey will have a larger number than the predators, and the pattern is some kind of overlapping. However, for the predators is a lagged behind curve, which means that the peaks of the predators is a little bit skewed to the right. That is, comparing this region and also this region, the red one is a little bit to the right part, and you have to explain the reason. Both of the communities are harmed, and they usually compete for food, shelter, and space. And there are two types of competition. One is called the interspecific, and another one is called the intraspecific. For the interspecific one is like we human and the pigs, we may compete for same type of food, maybe rice. However, for all of us, we are all human. It is called the intraspecific competition, and you may think of which competition is more fierce and why. And then we come to the commercialism. The zero here means that the organisms at the back are not harmed nor benefited. So we usually use the example of barnacles and whales. And for the barnacles, it gains some movement and also a source of food. However, for whales, it's not really that affected. However, for commercialism, it's actually not that common because this is more common. Mutualism. Both of them are benefits. Because for organisms, they live together, there must be a reason. And usually the reason is that both of them are benefited from each other. So here are four famous examples. You have to remember all of them. Like the sea animal and also the crabs. And then here is the fish and the shark. And then is the leech, which the most important one is the algae and also the fungus and also the coral reef and clownfish. Let's spend a little bit more time about the last two. For the niche, for the algae, it will undergo photosynthesis and it will pass the food through the fungus. So fungus is benefited for a food source. For fungus, it is served as a protection for algae. So algae gain the protection from the fungus. So both of them gain benefit in their relationship. And for the coral reef and clownfish, if you want to know more, you may look for the famous movie called Finding Nemo, and the whole movie is about that particular mutualism. And for parasitism, it involves of two players. There is the parasite and also the host. And the host is definitely harmed, and for the parasite, is definitely living in a very happy state. And here are two examples. There's the tapeworm and also human. And also there is a very famous example called 美金菊. And you are not required to remember the scientific name. However, if you are able to look for this particular episode in the internet, you may know more about the damage of the 美金菊 to Hong Kong's communities. However, for nowadays, it's very difficult to find this particular chapter in Hong Kong. And in ecology, we'd like to know about succession. There will be two types of succession. One is called the primary succession, another one is called the secondary succession. For primary succession, it's actually from nothing to something, and for secondary succession, it's from something to more things. So here are the process of succession. That is, the organism will modify their habitat, and they are replaced as the habitat change, and the species diversity will increase, and finally, they will reach a climax communities. And so, as I mentioned previously, that the energy will flow in the ecosystem in form of food. And however, the energy loss is inevitable. So there is always an energy loss. So in the food chain and food webs, it shows the direction of and how the material flow. And here are the roles of organisms and their energy flow. The most important player will be the producer. That's we usually call the autotrophs because they produce food, and then there are consumers eating the producers. Then there are different levels of consumer, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And usually this player is against the decomposer. And why? We'll talk about it later on. And in this concept, we also have a concept of trophic levels. For producer, this is the first level. That's why we call the first trophic level. And for tertiary consumers, this is the fourth trophic level. And here are the ways why energy is lost. So there are uneaten materials, undigested and eaten materials, excretory products, and also lose heat during respiration. And you are kindly reminded to recite at least two of them. And here I call it 10% rules. That is, from one trophic level to another one, usually only 10% of energy is transferred. So from the producer to the primary consumer, if the producer has 100 units of energy, only 10% will reach the primary consumers. And for the role of the decomposer in the ecosystem, to break down the uneaten dead bodies, ingested materials, or excretory product, that is everything that produced, and they are usually called as, and usually they are fungus or bacteria, and then they carry out respiration to release the carbon dioxide back to the system, and then the plant take up the carbon dioxide. It's important for material cycling. However, this is not usually shown in the food chain. In order to show the trophic level, we will use ecological pyramids. There are two types of pyramids. One is called the pyramid of numbers by simply counting the number of individuals. So usually the base is very large. However, there is a kind of inverted pyramid of numbers. If the producer is very large in mass, so let's say a tree. So in order to capture that idea, we have pyramid of biomass. So for tree one, this is no longer inverted in the pyramid of biomass. However, we're still able to produce an inverted pyramid of biomass. That is, if we have a high turnover rate producer, that is the phytoplankton, and then we're still able to produce an inverted pyramid of biomass. So here are the limitations of the pyramid. So the energy flow to the decomposer is not indicated, and for the trophic level of an organism may vary with the type of food they eat. That is, it may be at the same time the primary consumers and also the secondary consumers. And also some organisms may switch their diet during their growth period. And then another important part of this chapter is about material cycling. There will be two cycles that we have to recite. One is called a carbon cycle. And here are the terms related to carbon cycle. You have to remember every single one of them and able to link all of them in a cycle. And here is the second one called the nitrogen cycle. And other than the feeding, death, and also excretion, they also have some more difficult terms, and you have to understand what is going on in that particular process. For the nitrification is the change of NH4 plus to NO2 minus and then to NO3 minus, because an NO2 minus is not stable. I strongly recommend you to remember the chemical formula instead of the English name, because it is much easier to communicate and easier to write and also easier to remember. And then for nitrogen is the change of nitrogen into the nitrogen oxide and then finally to NO3 minus. And then for nitrogen fixation is the direct fixing of the atmospheric N2 to NH4 plus. And The bacteria can also undergo denitrification, this is the change of NO3 minus to N2. So how we humans are impacting the ecosystem? We destroy the habitat directly by deforestation, dam construction, and mining, by completely destroying their homes, and the home and the and animals are homeless and they are surely dead. And we overexploit the resources, and we do the pollutions by producing solid waste. Every day we do that, and if we travel, we produce O2, NO, and also NO2 because of the power production. And also we are contributing a lot to the global warming. There's the methane, there's the CH4, and also CO2. And for conservation, we have the sense that the natural resources can be used, but used sensibly to avoid the degradation of the environment. So we have the concept of sustainable, which is a key concept in the conservation. And then we have to protect the natural habitat instead of like restoring the natural habitat. And we have to protect the endangered species, use of alternative energy resources like the wind power and also solar energy. And we have to manage and good use of the natural resources, and to reduce the use of natural resources and waste. And finally, if you are able to go to the field, as the field trip, we have to understand how we're going to sample. Sampling is just some standard and repeatable methods to collect data. And for samples plants, we have these three terms. There's the quadrant, light transect, and also the BIOL transect. So for sampling by quadrant, they say randomly place the quadrant on the floor. So we are going to calculate the absolute density, relative density, percentage cover, relative frequency. And if you're really required to do that in your field study, usually your teachers will guide you how to do it. And if you are required to do it in the exam, usually the exam will give you some more examples in order to guide you. Otherwise, it will be too difficult for most of you. And however, the use of quadrant has its own limit because it cannot be used to sample fast-moving organisms. You're going to place a metal grid on the floor. If you're going to sample a butterfly can definitely fly. So it is relatively stupid. So also the size of the organism must be small enough to be put in a quadrant. You're not going to use a quadrant to measure a giant tree. Okay, it's again a stupid action. And it can be used alone only if the habitat is relatively uniform. If there is a gradual change of the habitat, it is not very reasonable to use quadrant and random sample in the field. And for the line transect one, is a systematic one, so you identify all the organisms covered or touching the line. However, you are not able to find the abundance because the line is so thin that you are going to hit only a few of them. So in order to strengthen the line transect, we will use BIOL transect. It's a combination of the quadrant and also the line transect, and we will present the data in a case diagram. And if you are really sampling some free moving organism, you may use a net and trap. However, you can see a big no here because the main rule, and also I will take it as the first rule in going to the field, is we never hurt organism. No matter it's an animal or a plant, we can never hurt them in the field because we're just a visitor of the field, and you are not a god and you are not supposed to do that. So remember to respect their existence. And you have to measure the abiotic factors, and we may bring sensors, and nowadays we have our mobile device, and in our mobile device we can do so many amazing things. And here are some extracts from the HKGA document. So it talks about the level of organisms and also some major types. There's freshwater, mangrove, rocky shore, grassland, woodland. And then we talk about abiotic factors, biotic factors, the concept of niche, and then we move to the concept of energy flow, material cycle. In the material cycling, we focus on the carbon and also nitrogen cycles, so you have to remember that. And there are also good essay that is recently done about the carbon cycle. And then we know the role of the producer and also decomposer in the energy flow and also recycling of materials. And for conservation, we have to know that the human activities are having a huge impact on the ecosystem. And if we are going to study the local habitat, we have some sampling method, standard sampling method, and the term we usually use will be Quadrant or the BIOL chance. So here will be the end of this chapter, and here are some nature of science things, because if you are going to a field, you have to understand what you're doing, and in the limited time, hopefully you and your teacher will enjoy a happy time. And I hope every one of you will be having a great time and be able to join the field trip. So here will be the end of chapter 19 revision video. So I hope to see you guys next time. Bye bye.